I hate you, man!
By the end of the night, you will fall in line.
With Roman coming back, let's take a look at his best feud against Jey Uso. This made Jey a superstar overnight, but how did it happen, Brothers of Production? Well, let's take a look back. On August 23rd, 2020 at SummerSlam, The Fiend and Braun Strowman had a Falls Count Anywhere match for the title. The Fiend would go on to retain his title, but after the match, Roman Reigns would return like an absolute badass and beat the hell out of The Fiend and Braun Strowman. He would hold up the title to end the pay-per-view. I just want to say I always wanted that Roman Reigns t-shirt. That shit was so hard. On the August 28th episode of SmackDown, Adam Pearce would go in the Roman Reigns' locker room and needed a signature. Roman said at Payback, he would take back his title and then he would align himself with Paul Heyman himself. On August 30th at Payback, Braun and The Fiend would go on to break the ring. Then Roman came out at the very end, signed the contract, hit Braun with a spear, and won the Universal title to end the pay-per-view. On the September 4th episode of SmackDown, Roman and Paul would have a promo, and Paul would say Roman pulled him in and that Roman corrupted him and said that he's a special counsel for the tribal chief. Then Roman would say that he's a man of his word for beating Braun and The Fiend for the title. Then in the back, Jey would come up to Roman and ask if he can trust Paul, and he said he's got Roman's back. In the main event, Jey would be in a fatal 4-way. Jey would go against King Corbin, Matt Riddle, and Sheamus for the number one contendership for the Universal title, and Jey would go on to win the match. On the September 11th episode of SmackDown, Jey would come out and thank Roman. Roman said, "I'm proud of you, and our family is." Then King Corbin came out. Yeah, I don't know why, but he said Roman pulled strings for Jey, and Sheamus came out and he would agree with Corbin. This would set up a tag match to end the show, but Jey would come out by himself, he would do all the work, then Roman would tag in at the last second, hit a spear, and win the match. So he third-partied the whole mission, and took all the credit. On the September 18th episode of SmackDown, there would be a rematch in a Samoan street fight. Roman would spear Sheamus through the barricade, Jey would hit Corbin with the title, and then they would go on to get the win. After the match, Jey would get Roman's title and pretend to hold it up, but he would toss it to Roman, and Roman kind of took this personally, not gonna lie. On the September 25th episode of SmackDown, Jey would ask Roman about the look. Then Paul would say a face-to-face would happen at the end of the show. And I just gotta say, this feud made Jey a superstar overnight, and this helped the WWE. The WWE was in a bad place, and this was the kickstart to make it great again. Then, Alpha and Sika and Rikishi said they saw Roman felt as he was the big dog, and they said Jey paid his dues. Face-to-face, Roman said that he would give Jey the title if he wanted to, but he couldn't understand the pressure and the accountability for it, and said that he always depended on Jimmy. Roman would walk away. Jey would then ask why he couldn't provide for the family and asked if he was wrong. These promos were so good. Jey would walk off with all the momentum, but Roman would hit him with a Superman punch and held the title over him and said that Jey would never take his place at the head of the table. At Clash of the Castle, they would have a match, and Roman would just be dog-walking Jey and tell him to acknowledge him, but he wouldn't. So Roman would just pound him. Then a limping Jimmy would come out and beg Jey to throw in the towel. Roman would pound him again, and Jimmy would throw in the towel, and Roman retained his title to end the show. On the October 2nd episode of SmackDown, Roman would have a ceremony and he would want Jey to acknowledge him. Jey would come out and Roman would give Jey another title match at Hell in a Cell. Roman would hug Jey and tell him not to accept the match, and then he would leave. But Jey would say it's on, and then AJ Styles would come out and said he doesn't deserve another match. To end the show, AJ and Jey had a match, and Jey would go on to win. On the October 9th episode of SmackDown, Jey would come out and ask Roman what type of match they would have at Hell in a Cell. Roman would be in the back, and he said he tried to help Jey and make his life easier. And he said he wants Jey to acknowledge him and wants to hear him say "I quit." On the October 16th episode of SmackDown, Roman would have a match with Braun Strowman and would make Braun tap. Jey was watching backstage. Roman would attack Braun after the match. Jey would come out and start a big-ass brawl, and Roman would hit Jey with a Superman punch to end the show. On the October 23rd episode of SmackDown, Jimmy would be sitting at the head of the table and said Roman changed. Jey would pull King Von coming out of nowhere and attack Roman. Roman grabbed the mic and said if he loses everything. The head of the table, everything. He also said when Jey loses, he will fall in line, and if not, he's out, threatening to kick him, Jimmy, his kids, and wives out of the family. The cell would lower to end the show. At Hell in a Cell, Roman would be killing Jey, officials trying to stop Roman. Jimmy came out, and Roman started crying and saying, "I don't even know who I am anymore." And Roman would hug Jimmy. But he put Jimmy in a guillotine, and Jey would have to say "I quit" to make him let go. Then Alpha and Sika would crown Roman as their tribal chief. On the October 30th episode of SmackDown, Jey would break down crying saying that he didn't beat him. Roman would tell Jey to honor the oath and fall in line. Jey would yell at Roman saying he hates him, and then Roman said by the end of the night, you will fall in line. Later in the show, Jey would face Daniel Bryan, Roman would come out, and Jey would go on to beat Bryan. After the match, Jey would finally fall in line and acknowledge Roman as the tribal chief. Then he would attack Daniel Bryan. This is why I love the storyline that actually makes you feel something deep down. After this, Roman and Jey would go on to take over the whole WWE landscape. Jey and Jimmy would go on to win the tag titles, and Roman would go on to keep his title for a long time. And then, 2 years later, on the May 12th episode of SmackDown, Jey and Jimmy would go on the vow to bring the tag titles back to the Bloodline. But Roman said him and Solo would go on to do it themselves. On May 27th at Clash at the Castle, Roman and Solo would lose. Then Roman would push Jey, Jimmy would have his brothers back, and superkick Roman twice. On the June 2nd episode of SmackDown, Jey, Jimmy, and Solo told Roman, let's run it back with respect. Roman would break down crying, but then he would say no. Solo would spike Jimmy, splitting them from the Bloodline. On the June 16th episode of SmackDown, Jey looked like he was going to stay with Roman, and told Jimmy, you're out. Took a pause and he said, then I'm out too. Turned on the Bloodline, leading to a match at Money in the Bank. This shit was so cold. But on July 1st at Money in the Bank, the Usos would go on to beat Roman and Solo. Jey would pin Roman for the first time in almost 3 years. I was shocked, honestly. On the July 7th episode of SmackDown, the Bloodline would have tribal court for Roman. Jey and Jimmy would show examples of Roman being a massive manipulator. And not gonna lie, they're spitting facts. Roman would say that's not who he is, and he said, I did it for y'all. Roman would say he's done, and give Jey the lay, and get down on both knees. Pause. But Roman would low blow Jey. Solo and Roman would go on just to beat the hell out of the Usos. At the end of the show, Jey would spin the block on Solo and attack him. Then he said he needs Roman in a 1v1 to end the show. On the July 14th episode of SmackDown, Jey would come out and cut a promo. Then Paul and Solo would come out and said next week, Roman and you will be face to face. Jey would then go on to superkick Solo and Paul. I'm dead. But on the July 21st episode of SmackDown, Roman and Jey would have a contract signing, and Jey would say it's tribal combat. Jey and Roman would hug, but then Solo would try to attack Jey, Roman would stop him, and then Jey would hit Solo with a super kick. On the July 28th episode of SmackDown, Roman and Jey would have a promo. Roman would dig deep and say without Jimmy, he'd be lost, and said that you can't beat me. Jey would say he already beat Roman, and at SummerSlam, I'll do it again. In the main event, Jey would have a match versus Grayson Waller, and he would go on to win. But after the match, Solo and Roman would go on to beat up Jey to end the show. On the August 4th episode of SmackDown, Jey and Solo would have a match. Jey would go on to hit a spear and then go on to win the match. But after the match, Solo would attack Jey, but Jey would get all the momentum back before SummerSlam. The next night at SummerSlam, Jey and Roman would have a classic and an amazing match. Jey would hit a spear and a splash, but Jimmy would pull Jey from winning the title. Roman would spear Jey to retain his title. They had an amazing match, honestly. But I just have to say, I think Jimmy's a little jealous of Jey, because he cost him the belt 3 times, so I'm kind of getting some cloud chasey vibes, but what do you guys think? But after this, Jey would go to Raw and be a huge star, and Roman would just go on to keep his title. But at WrestleMania 40, Jey and Jimmy would go on to have a match, and Jey would go on to win. Then, Cody would go on to finish the story, and then Roman would go on to take a break. But Jey would still go on to be a huge star on Raw, but at SummerSlam 2024, Roman would come back to attack Solo. Now we are at present day, but here's my prediction. Roman is going to need help to beat Solo's bloodline, so he's going to try to convince Jimmy and Jey for a War Games match at Survivor Series, and they're going to agree to help Roman. But yeah, y'all, that's the video. It's crazy to think in the pandemic era, Jey and Roman went on to save SmackDown and the whole WWE landscape, because it was at a bad place at the time, and this feud honestly started the kickstart to save WWE. But yes, in my opinion, this is Roman's best feud of all time, like as a champion or whatever. But I want to hear what you guys think in the comment section below. And alright, y'all, like and subscribe, and Birds of Productions, out of here.
I'm with you. You're the head of the table.